Hello, my Facebook followers. Welcome. It is Friday, September 11th, 2020, and it's 4 p.m., which means, yes, it's time for us to come together and to discuss all things COVID that have occurred over the last week that I'm aware about and give you a little bit of an update on what's been going on. Um, the Of course, this is a very different Friday because this is 9/11, and we all remember, like it was yesterday for all of us that are old enough, what it was like on September 11th, 2001. And we lost many people tragically when the terrorist attack where the planes went into the World Trade Center. So I do want to take a moment to definitely remember and acknowledge the horrible loss that our country sustained on that day. Um, the the statistics, my of course printer just went dead just because that's my life, so you guys have to bear with me when I'm looking for the stats. I'm not going to be able to give you the accurate rundown like I normally can as easily. I did forward it over, so I'll see if I can pull it up on my telephone so that I can go over it with you guys. But that's always Murphy's Law, right? Uh, but as far as the World Trade Center, there we lost 2,726 people on that day. Um, and we were devastated. We were devastated. It was just, I can remember it just like it was yesterday. I can't believe it's been so long. And then the majority of the people actually died that day that they can actually link directly to it. About 13 people died afterwards, attributed to the World Trade Center bombing. And of course, we're also talking about those that died uh, um, um, in the airplanes and at the Pentagon as well. Of that, just so you're aware, um, 77% of them were males, 23% were females. The average age of was 39, but we lost Americans as young as under the age of 5, and some that were over age of 80. Once again, we lost all nationalities. They were Caucasian, they were Black, they were Hispanic, they were Asian, and over 90% of them were uh, native to the United States. So it definitely was, excuse me, 79%, excuse me, 79%. So it was definitely a tragic day. But what was really good was that we came together afterwards. So it was tragedy and it was horrifying and it was upsetting and it was scary. But we came together as Americans. We united and we were one front, and it didn't matter whether you were black, brown, yellow. It didn't matter whether you were rich or poor. What was important is that we were united in our front as American citizens. And so I think that we need to take that into account when we are looking as far as what we're dealing with it right now. I mean, we were horrified and crushed that, just short of 3,000 lives were lost on that day. But we are now in a pandemic where we are losing hundreds of thousands of Americans. And so we need to kind of, we go over this data every week, and so it kind of starts to we kind of get a little jaded, unfortunately. It's like, oh, okay, so 6 point, where we at now? Oh, I got my data. Might not be able to read it, it's kind of small, but 6.5 million Americans have COVID. You know, um, and it shouldn't be that way. I mean, as I've said over and over again, every life is important, and so every death is important. And the fact that in the United States, we have lost 195,000 people to COVID-19. We lost once again less than 3,000 to 9/11. We're talking about 192,000 more deaths to date, and they're anticipating many, many more if our trajectories continue to go the way they are. So just to kind of, take a moment to reflect on 9/11, but also to reflect on where we are now as a country, and where, as you know, that we don't lose sight for those numbers and what those lives were. We were very aware of those deaths. We were very aware of the tragic loss of life that occurred on 9/11. Um, hi, I'm not going to pronounce your name because I'm going to mess it up. So we were very aware of that. We were very, very aware of the tragic loss of life, but we aren't paying attention as much. Like I said, I think we're getting a little jaded to the point where we're kind of like, okay, so now we're up, 195,000 up from 190,000. That's 5,000 more lives that were lost in the last week to COVID-19, and each one of those people had a loved one, and more, and suffered and died very quickly. So yes, they didn't die that day. They didn't. Thank God, most people are not dying that day, but they are becoming extremely ill very quickly. And so it is a very sudden loss of life that was not expected. And so we just keep that in mind as we go through this data, and that you guys don't lose sight and get so jaded that we kind of miss that important thing. So let's go over the numbers real quick for the COVID statistics. So worldwide now we are at 28.3 million people across the world that have been diagnosed with COVID-19. And this is very eerie because today is 9/11. There are 911,000 deaths across the world from COVID-19 today on 9/11. What does that mean? And then survivors, yes, we have survivors as well, and we always happy to know that there is a significant portion of people that are surviving, and we're at 19 million. Across the world. Within the United States, like I said, we're at 6.5 million cases now, up from 6.28 million cases last week, and 195,000 deaths, up from 190,000 last week, and 3.25 million survivors in the United States. The behind that is the other countries that are behind us. India is second in the number of cases at 4.56 million cases. Their death rate, their number of deaths at this point are lower at 76,000. Brazil actually has less people positive, but has had more deaths at 130,000. And then Russia, there's a big drop off. So we've got the U.S. at 6.5 million. Brazil and India are at 4 million plus or minus, and then you drop way down to Russia, who's number 4, and they're at 1 million, and their death are 18,000 compared to our 195,000. So once again, keep these numbers in your head as you're looking. You guys know that my office is located in Central Florida, so I do like to give the local data as well. And within Central Florida, within Florida itself, we are at 655,000 cases, and my numbers got all screwed up because of this. My printer didn't print out, so I don't want to mess this up. My deaths are rolling around here. It looks like we're at 14,000 deaths. No, excuse me, I correct myself. It's 12.3 thousand deaths within the state of Florida. California has the most cases at 753,000. And they've had 14,000 deaths. Now, Texas, unfortunately, has 679,000 cases. They had surpassed us a couple of weeks ago, Florida. And unfortunately, their death rate has significantly surpassed us, and they're now at 14.1 thousand. So their number of deaths is actually higher than California, even though California has a significant, almost 80,000 more cases. So that's definitely concerning for Texas overall. The of course, as we always go through, New York's data is high just because of the original data, but their number of deaths is actually holding steady at 32.6 thousand. Georgia has had an increase up to 273,000 from 261,000 over the last week, and the number of deaths is at 6.1 thousand, up from 5.7. So still a significant drop off, but they had significant increases in their numbers recently. Florida had been doing really well. Our numbers had been going down. We just had yesterday 211 deaths, which is the most deaths we've had in the state for a long time. So that was very concerning. And hopefully that will not occur anymore. To put things in perspective, last Thursday, there were only 14 deaths in the state of Florida. New cases 3,731 yesterday, up slightly from 3,259 cases a week ago. But looking at things like at the beginning of August, we were at 6,000 and higher new cases a day. So still, besides this recent bump, not as the numbers have not been. Florida has been seeing a downward trend. The percent positive testing rate is been less than 8% for the last 3 weeks. Our percentage for dying is about 2%. Our kids, the numbers have gone up. We're at 27,000 for the age 5 to 14 group, 101,000 for the 15 to 24 age group, and that's up from 96,000 the week before for that age group, and then for the younger age group, up just slightly from 26.5. The 24 to 34, we're at 122,000, up from 120. In that age group. Within Central Florida, our numbers are looking good as far as the hospitals. The hospital, Orlando Regional Hospital, which is one of the main hospitals in Central Florida, is noticing a 80% decline in inpatients compared to at the height of the pandemic here in Florida. So that's a blessing. And ICU at the main hospital downtown, they only have 17 patients and 111 in-house, a total of 283 within the Orlando Regional System, and approximately 400 in all of the hospitals in Central Florida. The data for Lake and Orange County, as you guys know, my office is located in Lake County, which is about 20 minutes due west of Orange County, which is where Orlando is located. And the Lake County, they're at 6.9 thousand cases. That's up another 300 from last week, with 485 total that have been hospitalized since the beginning of the pandemic, and 140 deaths, up from 128. The median age is 42. Men and women are running about even. The kids are at there's 1,000 kids in the 5 to 14 range age group. 15 to 24 is 1.2 thousand. Orange County is at 37.2 thousand cases, much bigger county than Lake, and they have 1.2 thousand total hospitalizations and 405 deaths. They did have, so that takes them up 19 deaths over the last week. The median age is 36 in Orange County. Like I told you, it's 42 in Lake County, and across the state, approximately about 41 is the average age. New things that are occurring in Florida, the bars are slated, even though we just had this increase in our numbers just in the last couple of days. The governor had given the okay for bars to attempt to open starting next week at 50% capacity. So we shall stay tuned and we shall see how that works. We already discussed last week that the in Central Florida, fall sports are returning to the schools. They're just getting started. So we shall once again see how that pans out over the next couple of weeks. Within Orange County, the kids are had 3 different options for going back to school: virtual, homeschooling, Launch Ed, which is basically the hybrid model where they learned from home for 9 weeks and then return to brick and mortar and then brick and mortar. So far, the schools are still slated to. The 9 weeks is coming close to close, and we have to notify by next week whether or not we are sending we want to switch around in that profile. And don't ask me, I have a junior in high school. She definitely wants to go back to brick and mortar. I don't know if that's happening or not. Still looking at the data and still waiting. We just had Labor Day, and normally the surges after these events are usually 1 to 2 weeks later. We just saw that bump yesterday, and so I will be probably keeping a close eye on those numbers for next week and seeing how things transpire and deciding at that point whether or not I feel comfortable or not with her being at brick and mortar. Um, Another thing that occurred here locally, one of our high schools that's actually very close to where we live, Olympia High School, had to shut down for 2 weeks and go back to virtual because they had six COVID cases test positive and had to isolate over 180 people based on that. So they did shut it down. You guys are aware that there are many, many outbreaks occurring throughout the country on the college campuses. And it's primarily being attributed to activities that are being um, performed outside of obviously the school setting. It's not what's happening in the classrooms. It's that these young adults and teenagers are getting together outside of the classrooms and congregating, and that's where we're getting the positivity rate. But once again, that then affects everybody because then they bring it back onto the campuses and they're spreading it. So the latest recommendation is that when these kids are positive, that they do not ship the kids home. So a lot of they've been implementing fines. Different universities are doing different things. They've been implementing fines. Some kids are being suspended for the whole semester and being sent home. So what they're now recommending is that they not be sent home because, of course, these kids are COVID positive, and then you're putting them on planes or on trains or automobiles, and then you're sending them back into their family setting, which can then further spread the COVID to wherever they're going. So the recommendation is to isolate them within the campus for the it depends on who you're talking to, 10 to 14 days, assuming that they're not symptomatic, and then send them home. So that's the latest recommendation. As far as news worldwide, India has had a big surge in their cases, and they're very concerned, as is worldwide, about starvation. The fact that now people are not able to work and that there's food scarcity, as we have seen, at the height of the quarantine here in the United States, and so people are having difficulty with access to food, either financially and or just with production of food throughout the world. So they're very concerned about that and the number of deaths that will occur just due to starvation as a fallout from COVID. Luckily, most of the school systems in the United States have been implementing their programs that they have for feeding the kids, and definitely like here in Orange County, I can tell you that the kids are able to get actually 4 meals a day, whether they are actually attending school in person or they are outside. There's an opportunity for them, if they're doing homeschooling, to the hybrid model, to come and get meals, so that at least most of the school districts, there should not be a problem where the kids that would qualify normally for eating at school are not able to do that. You may have heard there has been at least one confirmed teacher death. There was a South Carolina teacher that was actually doing was that in the school. They were actually getting ready to open the schools, but the teachers were in the school buildings doing the work that's required before school is launched, and she contracted COVID, 28 years old, and died within 3 days of being diagnosed. So definitely devastating news there. Speaking of the kids, since we're talking about the kids, let's talk about there's a couple of studies that just came out. One of them was actually a week or so ago, and I forgot to talk to you guys about it. And it was just talking about the fact that the kids that some of the kids, the reason why we may not be seeing the numbers in the kids that we were seeing in the adults in this severity is that because of their more chronic exposure to different, remember, coronavirus is not new. Coronavirus has been around. It's just this particular strain that is new to us. And so because kids are way more susceptible to colds and to the flu, that they may have a little bit of defense mechanism against the COVID-19. And that may lower the susceptibility to the infection and less side effects for them. They see that only about 21% of the age group in the 10 to 19 have the manifestation of the symptoms compared to the older ones. And so that's what they're kind of looking at that and trying to see if there's some degree of that that's going on. The other more recent data that just came out is a little bit more concerning. It was done, they actually took data from 400 different hospital discharges and looked at the young adults to see how they're faring, because we constantly hear that kids are doing really well, that most of them are asymptomatic, and that if you're younger that you're less likely to get extremely ill. And this is really a disease that is, as far as the more significant symptoms, is affecting the the older population and those that have what we call comorbidities, so other illnesses that are making them way more susceptible to that. So this data actually showed that 60% of that they are admitting young people into the hospital. They had 3222 young adults with COVID admitted to the hospital during this time frame, which is approximately a month that they looked at. Don't hold me exactly to that data. But of the discharge, 60% of the young patients were men, 60% of them were minority. And obviously, if they were extremely obese, which we've known obesity is one of the big confounding factors, and had high blood pressure, that they were more likely to have a worse outcome. But even though we're saying that 60% are minority, remember, that means 40% weren't. So it doesn't mean that, this is just a disease that if I'm not a minority, that if I'm not morbidly obese, if I don't have bad high blood pressure or diabetes, that it means that I'm not going to get COVID and that I'm not going to die of it. You cannot say that. I can tell you, I know people of all different walks of life that have had it, and people that are healthy, don't have any underlying medical conditions, and are not extremely overweight, who have been severely ill and have been intubated. So do not, you just can't. That's the problem with this disease, is it is not running a set pattern that we can definitely put our finger on and say, this is definitely, what's going to happen to you if you get it. And so be aware of that. Of the people that were hospitalized, just so you know, 2.7% of those young adults died. And 1 in 5 of them needed to be put in the intensive care unit. And then 1 in 10 of them had to be actually put on a ventilator. 3% of the ones that actually left the hospital actually couldn't go home. They were too sick to go home. They actually had to go into a rehabilitation center to build their strength back up before they were able to go home. So that means these people were really, really sick. That is not something that usually occurs in a young person, just so you know. The other thing, and so of course, this is important because what are we doing? Our kids are going back to school. They're going back into brick and mortar high schools and middle schools and grade schools, but also, once again, on our college campuses. And the thought process with a lot of these young adults and teenagers is that either that COVID's a hoax and they don't have to worry about it, or that it's just not going to make them, they don't have to worry about getting sick. It's just going to be like something they get. It's on the paper, but it's not something that actually affects them. So as we can see, it can affect them. So you need to be aware of that. If you're a parent, you need to be aware of that. It doesn't, you don't have that guarantee that your child is going to be one of the lucky ones. We, of course, pray that would be the case, but we don't know. So the numbers are actually going up in the kids. We have 513,000 kids diagnosed, and that's up 37,000 kids in the last week. thousand people. Once again, how many people did we lose in the World Trade Center? Less than 3,000. We're talking about 37,000 new cases of COVID in our children. So once again, keep these numbers in your head because we kind of get jaded, like I said. And so our numbers, if you look at the overall stats within the United States, that's up 8%. We're at 8% of the COVID cases are children, and that's up from 5% back in May. So the numbers are definitely increase. So just keep that in mind as we are talking about these things and as we're seeing. And we don't know what the long term effects are. We just don't. We don't know what the long term effects are to the kids, to the young adults, and to everyone that's getting COVID 19. Even the ones that are asymptomatic or think they're asymptomatic, we're seeing that there may be changes once again to their lungs, to their heart, to their brains. And we will not know for several years what the full fallout's going to be from this. So the best and safest thing is to try not to get it. It's not like one of these things where you want to just kind of get it and get it over with. And I can tell you at one point that was kind of something I wanted to do because it's like that feeling constantly of trying to avoid it and thinking, wow, if I could just get it and not have symptoms, wouldn't it be nice to have some antibodies and be able to relax? But that's not the right thought process because once again, I'm actually very healthy, but that doesn't mean that I can't be one of the people that becomes severely ill. So just take care of yourself. Do the things that you can do to decrease your risk because you don't know. Um, the Hi Karen. The other thing we talked about last week was the Brady-Kinane hypothesis, and we talked about one of the things that they found with that was that vitamin D seemed to be a big proponent in being helpful with COVID, which we've been saying all along. But what's been interesting is you're hearing about these studies and all these recommendations for the very expensive drugs and etc. And people are saying why. Uh, Eileen said, thank you for good, honest info. I had a storekeeper try to shame me for wearing a mask and trying to be safe today. She spouted a ton of info saying it's all overblown. I don't set foot in the shop. No, you really can't. You can't change people. Unfortunately, wearing a mask has almost become like a political statement, and it shouldn't be. This is our life. It's your life, and I don't care what anybody tells you. It's your life. You better protect yourself. And wearing a mask should not be a political statement. It's not. COVID is not a political thing. This is a medical disorder, and we need to treat it that way and stop getting all caught up in whatever else we want to get caught up in. And so COVID doesn't care. COVID doesn't care what nationality you are. It doesn't care whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, whether you're an independent. It don't care. So, and unfortunately, until it actually hits home, sometimes people forget that little tidbit. So back to the vitamin D, I just wanted to tell you that there are people that were saying we're not hearing about the basic things that people can be doing. So there are two studies that came out on vitamin D specifically, and they just like I've been saying all along. Yes, vitamin D, extremely important, extremely helpful. And so I think that one of the studies was done on patients in the hospital, and they gave them activated form of vitamin D in very high dosages, so not something that you're actually able to administer yourself at home. But they found that in people that they gave vitamin D to, and they did it, and it was actually a actual well done study that the people that got vitamin D were less likely to become severely ill, way less likely to go into the ICU, and none of the people that got vitamin D died. Now, that does not mean it was a very small pilot study, so it doesn't mean that if you maximize your vitamin D that you're not going to get COVID and that you're not going to die of COVID. I cannot tell you that, but what I can tell you is that it's a very simple thing that you can be doing, that you should be doing to help to mitigate your risk, and as long as I do recommend having numbers followed if you're going to get into the higher dosages. But yes, I've always been a big proponent of vitamin D, and I highly recommend it. And the range, remember, for vitamin D, depending on the testing laboratory you go to, is anywhere usually from 30 to 100. But I tell people 30 is the bare bottom. Ideally, especially if we're trying to boost up our immune system and we're trying to be fighting off COVID, I recommend that your numbers run between 70 and 100. And that requires actually getting levels checked. So normally, in my practice, what we do is we check a vitamin D level. And then based on that, I will make recommendations on how much to use. And then we go back and we recheck that vitamin D level in 3 months. Please don't go crazy. Just because it's available over the counter doesn't mean you can down bottles and bottles of it. It is, as we've said before, fat soluble, which means that it can hang out and hang out and hang out. And it is possible to become vitamin D toxic. It takes a lot of work to do it. But there are people that I never say never, and there are people that do very interesting things. So, which is why I don't give out dosages to you guys, because I don't want to ever be accused of telling people to take something that then they run and go and run with it and end up hurting themselves. So, if it's something that you're interested in, like I said, we can certainly do a consult with you and go over your immune status and or your vitamin status without a problem. So that's what I want. Oh, one more thing. So I'm not gonna, vaccines. Once again, big, huge topic, and constantly changing. What I will tell you is that there are 3 vaccines that are in what we call phase 3 trials right now as we speak in the United States. And what that means, so phase 1 is where they're actually just kind of testing it out. It's less than 100 people, and they're trying to figure out whether or not this thing has any teeth, if it's going to actually appear to do anything that is. So first they check it out in petri dish, right? So before it ever gets into a person, it's checked out in petri dishes and on rats, etc. But then after that, when it's getting into the phase 1 trial where they're actually putting it into human beings, and it's a very, very small number, and they're looking for serious side effects. They're looking for whether it appears to have any kind of benefit, etc. Then phase 2, it expands out, and it's a couple of thousand people at the most, and they're looking at that same number. Phase 3 is where they start to spread it out, and it's usually about 30,000 people or so. And so that's where we are, because we don't want to be letting something that sounds like a whole lot of people, but in the big scheme of things, 30 to 60,000 people, when we're talking about millions and millions and millions of people, is a whole different kit and caboodle. So there's a couple of things with the trials. Number one, AstraZeneca, which is one of the 3 companies that is in phase 3, actually halted their study. And that's because they saw a serious side effect in only one person. But that shows you how closely these vaccine trials are being followed, because there's a lot of people out there going, oh, they're just going to start in, they're not going to do their due diligence, and they're not going to pay attention to safety, and they're just going to start injecting everybody and forcing everybody to get vaccines, and it's not going to be safe, and all sorts of horrible things that people think are going to happen to them. And the bottom line is that it is very closely watched. There are groups that are not political at all, made up of scientists, made up of epidemiologists, made up of medical professionals that watch these studies. And these vaccines trials are not new. Medication trials are not new. These things have been going on for years and years and years. And so their job is to supervise, to make sure that the studies are done correctly, that they're done. If these are what we call double-blind studies, they're the only ones that know the information. So, like, if you enroll in this study, you don't know if you're getting a placebo vaccine or if you're actually getting the COVID-19 vaccine. You will not know while you're in the trial. And the only way you possibly would know is if they saw an overwhelming a positive or an overwhelming negative, then they will halt the trial because they feel like it's a disservice. So obviously, if it's an overwhelming positive where people that are getting the vaccine are doing, I'm just going to throw out, like, say, out of 30,000 people, everybody that doesn't get the vaccine, this is really hypothetical, gets COVID, and everybody that has the vaccine is not getting COVID. Well, then, hey, they're catching on that this is huge. Then it's a disservice. They don't want the people that don't have the vaccine going without it, right? But that is not usually the case. It takes a lot for trials to be truncated like that. So you hear all this controversy, and you hear, oh, there's going to be a vaccine available by October 31st. I've looked at multiple journals, listened to multiple medical, not political, conversations that are out there from physicians, from scientists, and you never say never. I never say never. But the likelihood of there being a vaccine by October 31st is pretty much nil. Most of these three, there's only three phase three trials going on. AstraZeneca's is already halted, so there's no way they're getting to October 31st. The other two have not fully enrolled. And so, and this is September 19th. They have to get they get the trial is an injection and an injunction a month later. That means the second injection. I mean, if you haven't even enrolled everybody in the study, there's no way that everybody's going to have had their second injection even by October 31st to look at the data. So don't worry about it. Don't stress about that. If you're one of the people that's been really concerned about the fact that they were going to roll out a vaccine by October 31st, the likelihood, like I said, is next to nil that that's going to occur. But pay attention. And so the thought process currently is that we're once again, which they've been saying all along, looking at either the end of this year or next year as far as the vaccine. A couple of things you need to be aware of that we've talked about before with the vaccinations. We know that the older you are, the higher risk you are of dying of COVID and getting severely ill. We know that minorities, especially African Americans and within the United States and Hispanics and Native Americans are more likely to have severe symptoms and die of it. And what's happening, unfortunately, is that the majority of people that are enrolling in the study are young Caucasians. So what's going to happen at that is that the vaccine, if that's the case, will not apply to the people that it needs to apply to the most. So if you want to have a vaccine that is effective against you, people that look like you, then you need to make sure that that trial is involving people that look like you. That's the whole point of the trial. And so it becomes a double-edged sword where people are afraid of the trials, but you need to have people that are willing to step up and be in the trials in order to get the data that we need from the trials. And there's a definite, what's very interesting, guys, is that pharmaceutical companies and usually are very much about, their own bottom line, and they're working together. They've actually 8 of the big companies came together and signed a form saying that they're not going to allow political pressure to force them to do anything that would not be within the realms of public safety and release any kind of a vaccine without feeling 100% sure, or there's never 100%, but extremely sure that this is a safe and efficacious vaccine. So that's huge. Never happened before. So just so you know, the pharmaceutical companies understand that the American public is getting very afraid of a vaccine being released that is not safe and is not could do detrimental things, and they are stepping back and they're saying, hey, we're going to make sure that when we roll out something that it's going to be good. So that is, and I'm a physician. I'm telling you, that's very reassuring, and it's not something that usually happens. So that's it's huge, even though you may not realize that's never happened before. Normally, of course, it's a race, between whatever drug, and they're competing against each other. So the fact that they're able to come together like that and work together is amazing. The other thing is that they've even said that they may halt the trials if they do not get enough of the spread that they need. If they don't get the people that are the highest risk for not doing well in the trials, that they may actually slow the trials down to get those people, because once again, otherwise the trial doesn't mean anything. So just keep that in mind. And if you have people, or if you yourself are open and want to, this is a time where, just like we admired the people that stepped up at 9/11 and went the extra mile. This is your extra mile. I mean, if you're not, one of the people that's petrified of getting a vaccination, this is your time. And once again, we talked about it, you can get reimbursed as well. One of the listeners last week said up to 15 that she has seen a study where it was actually $1,500 reimbursement. And I'm not saying you should do it just for money, but I'm just letting you know it's not like you're doing it and you're not getting reimbursed, and you're being watched like a hawk. So don't worry about that. They've already like I said, halted just from one adverse effect in a study already. They're watching their study participants extremely closely, so you don't have to worry. about that. And I've talked to people that have actually gotten vaccines, and so far everybody's good. It's so there's just side effects that always go with vaccines. That if you get a flu shot or whatever, you can get a little bit of achiness at the site. You can get some, a little fever. Some people do, or just feel kind of like a little bleh, so those are known side effects that can go with vaccinations, and so they're expecting some of that. So that's where it's not like they're expecting people to do horrible things by any way, shape, or form. So hopefully that is helpful for you guys. We'll keep delving into the vaccines as they come. And then the last thing I wanted to just talk to you about was the flu vaccine, and because of course it's a vaccine, right? And there's been controversy for years about the flu vaccine. Do I get it? Do I not get it? Is it effective? I got it, or I know so and so that got it and they got the flu, and I've never gotten one. I've never gotten the flu. As we can see, as you can see, if you obviously you're watching me on Facebook live, or you're watching me on YouTube, so you are somebody that is involved in social media, and so there's a lot of information out there, and that information is fed based on um, what people are what the American public is interested in hearing, and so. Um, Flu's not something people wanted to hear about. They just didn't care. I mean, so it was out there. People have been saying people are dying of the flu. People need to get their flu shots. I mean, it was kind of like going, rah, 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 and people just kind of ignore it. And the same thing. I mean, there have been people that die of the flu. If you actually look long and hard, you will know someone, probably somewhere in your extended circumstance, that has actually died of the flu. But it's just not talked about. It's just not talked about. Just like heart disease is the number one killer of men and women. But people are coming in every day and see me and go, oh my God, I'm worried about getting breast cancer. I don't get people walking in going, oh my God, I'm worried about, getting a heart attack and dying. Most of my patients don't say that, even though they have big control over that. And it's the number one killer of men and women. But it's something they don't want to hear about. It's not glamorous, and it involves them doing something that they don't want to do. It involves, eating right and exercising and doing all the stuff that we're supposed to do, that we want to, instead of eating junk food and sitting on our butts. And so we don't want to hear about that. So same thing when it comes to flu shots. And so the flu shots are there. They are recommending them. And so let's just go over a couple of things why. Because the flu can be deadly as well. And if not, you can still get very sick. If you don't know anybody that died of a flu shot, not a flu shot, of the flu, you certainly know somebody that's been extremely ill, right? And it may have been you. And who wants to feel like that? Think about it. So that's number one. You don't want to feel sick. Number two, the symptoms are going to be pretty darn close. So as soon as you get sick, you're not going to know if you have COVID or whether you have the flu. That's a scary thing, okay? So because we know that COVID is a really fast actor. So not to say you can't die of the flu, but once again, we've got way more people dying of COVID. So, you don't want to put yourself in that fear thing. And so, if to the extent that you can get your flu vaccine and decrease your risk of getting the flu, and if you get it, of having milder symptoms, that will actually help your anxiety and your stress if you start to get sick. The third thing is that we need people to step up and get their flu shot, because a lot of people get hospitalized from the flu, and that's taking up a hospital bed. We know that the COVID numbers are probably going to increase in the fall, because what's happening? People are going back inside. And so the numbers have already been increasing. So we're expecting that it could actually go way back up again. We don't want it to, but it's possible. So we need all those hospital beds to stay free. We don't want the hospitals to be overrun with the flu, and then COVID patients, or heart attack patients, stroke patients, everybody else is not able to get in because we've got all these flu cases. So it's and then the last thing is, of course, once again, if you've got the flu, what are you doing? You're coughing and you're sneezing. What does that mean? Particles going out. So once again, people that have the flu bug, if they heaven forbid have COVID at the same time, are going to be spreading more COVID, and then you're sick, you're miserable, and then you got to wear a mask. Who wants to do all that? So that's just my little thing. I mean, we have to get, as medical professionals that work in hospitals, we have to get flu vaccines, and it's not and it's to protect you. And so remember that these things are actually not just to protect the person that's getting it. It's also to protect the other people. So we get flu vaccines to protect us from getting the flu, but really more so because they don't want us as physicians to have the flu and to be giving it to the patients. And so just think about these things as you when we're talking about all of these different things that have to do with all viruses, not just COVID. So hopefully that's helpful. And you have to decide. Also, remember that when you get your flu vaccine, it's not like it takes immediate effect. And you have to build up the antibodies your immune system has to build up to fight against the flu. So you don't want to wait until it's really, really bad before you go get your vaccine. I'm not saying you have to run out right this minute. I know everybody's feeling nice and healthy right now. But I would definitely say you should really consider getting your flu shot by about October if you can. And they are available as far as I know now. So I think that that is good. We are at 45 minutes. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to broach them and or to instant message me and send me separate messages. And remember to, whatever it is you're supposed to do on Facebook, follow me, like me, whatever it is. And if you're watching on YouTube, to subscribe, all that fun stuff. And we will see how we transpire and what the fall offs are from Labor Day in the next week and a half. For those of you that haven't been following, that big motorcycle rally that did occur in Sturgis, they did have a significant number of people that have tested positive out of that group. So don't think that, once again, that this is a hoax and that it's hogwash, and they've had some deaths from that too. So just keep all of that in mind as you're going out. Live your life, but live your life as safe as you possibly can. So that's my recommendation. As always, stay healthy and stay safe, and have a wonderful weekend. I will see you guys next Friday at 4 p.m. Take care.